Hello, darling Amie. How are you?
I'm good, my darling. I'm really good. I'm excited to dive into this chat today.
It's so good. Thank you for being here and saying yes and always showing up.
My pleasure.
So I love it that I had this conversation with Amie. Actually, I think I just sent you a DM and was like, I just had this idea. I think I must have caught myself comparing myself on Instagram. And
Mm.
I know that you have these really open, honest, vulnerable conversations. Actually, somebody I was working with recently was like, I love the way that Amie shows up and does these things. And I thought, you know what? I think it's beautiful to have fellow women, especially on this
Mm.
journey, and we've had these conversations over and over again where it's like, this is how I'm feeling, and
Yeah.
nothing's off the cards. Like we'll talk about the highs and the lows
Yeah. So
and dive
important.
into it together, and aren't afraid to be like, this is how should I feel or whatever. And I think what made me reach out and want to record it is because something that I hate about my business sometimes is, whether it's an Instagram following or a certain status people perceive of you because of writing books or podcasting,
Mm.
or, that people think that you've got it all together. And
Yes.
I love peeling back that lie. I'm like, don't put me on a pedestal. I'm a hot mess.
It's super important that, I mean, it's very easy, I think, when you find any kind of semblance of success to allow yourself to be put on that pedestal,
Mm,
and because it can feel quite safe up there, and
mhm,
to enjoy these people's images of you being like,
mhm,
you never compare yourself anymore, you never make mistakes anymore, you're just swimming in money and success and connection, when the reality is so different. And it is so easy. And I think a lot of creatives and entrepreneurs who get to a place where people pedestal them, they want to stay there because it feels very safe. But it is so important. It's so important to have these discussions and to recognize that no matter where you are in the journey,
mhm,
these things, we're going to come across comparison, we're going to come across imposter syndrome, we're going to come
mhm,
across these feelings of insecurity wherever we're at. And I love
mhm,
that we get to peel back and talk about them together because it's
mhm.
so important.
Yeah, it's so interesting, hey, because I think there was a moment where, I was like, yes, I'm building, this reputation. And obviously it's part, you and I are both teachers and experts, or, we're helping people along the
Mm,
way who are wanting to take the journey that we took.
yeah.
And so we're constantly looking back and being like, yeah, here's how I got it. And
Mm.
it serves us to not put ourselves too
It
far ahead,
does, yeah.
because then no one wants to learn from someone who's just like, I've got it all together,
A
you know?
100%. Like, there is something, we can, I think this is something that's kind of misunderstood in this space, is like, we can be leaders and be deeply fallible, and we can be
Mhm,
experts and make big mistakes. And in fact,
mhm,
it only enhances the wealth of what you have to give to the world when you're open and honest about the humanness of
mhm,
daring to be an entrepreneur, daring to be a creative, daring to take up space. Like,
mhm.
it only makes us better teachers, it only makes us
Yeah.
better leaders when we're honest about um, all of the shit that comes up with being really brave and courageous and
Mhm,
doing the thing that we've been called to do.
mm. And I think there was, when I started out, there was big entrepreneurs and people that you admired. And I think
Mm,
over the times I've seen the paradigm shift of being like, yeah, that's all well and good. And I think that was something I was looking for. I didn't
mm,
want to be
mm.
in an audience of people being like, and then I did this, and now I'm here. I was like,
Oh my God,
yeah, but
yeah.
like, can you tell me some of the like
The gritty.
gritty,
Yeah.
not good stuff, because that makes me feel better.
Yeah. And it makes us, I think, when we don't see the gritty and we don't see that gnarly stuff, I think it encourages our perfectionism, and it
Mhm.
encourages this idea that, oh, maybe you can do it without fucking it,
Mm,
maybe you can do it without feeling insecure, and you can't. It's just such
mm,
a lie. And
mhm,
I think it's really irresponsible for people who are in leadership positions or who are sharing their story to negate
mhm,
this part of their story, because
mhm,
we are in a culture of really, really pervasive perfectionism. Like, people
mhm,
want perfection from themselves. And
mhm,
I think sometimes it's because a lot of people, especially on social media, will show their lives
mm,
without
mhm,
the
mhm,
grittiness.
mhm.
So I just want to get
Yeah,
into it. I just want to,
yeah, yeah. Say it how it is.
yeah, exactly.
And I love that. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, yes, we're looking for business advice or writing tips and
Yeah.
things, but we're also just looking for humans to connect with and be like, oh,
Yeah.
you've done it, I can do it too. Or like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's possible as well.
It's totally it's
Mm,
totally possible with the feelings of comparison, with the feelings of
mm,
being inferior. Like success and abundance and connection is possible with these,
mm,
with the grittiness involved, with the
yeah.
failures involved, and with the
Mm,
comparison involved.
yeah. And let's jump into comparison, because I think it's
Mm,
a killer of dreams
yeah.
and killer of action, killer of self-worth. And yeah, it just has so much potential to be brutal.
Mm,
And I think, one of the things that has been really like riling me up of late is this idea of, and I know you talk about this a lot, people who think they can't start or their business isn't worthy enough if they don't have a social media following,
yes.
and is a huge one, which I'm just
It's
like,
big.
ew, like I get it and I understand it. And I'm on the privileged side of having
Mm,
grown that early on.
yeah.
And that does have benefits in my business. But there's also many clients that I've got and people that if examples of my own life and people that I've watched where it, you've pitched yourself and it's actually more about your confidence and self-belief and the idea and your ability to execute that is cuts through
Oh my
beyond
God.
online presence.
Oh my God, this is such a big point of comparison. Oh, they have, and because it's so easy to compare, right? Because it's numerical, it's like very obvious how much, in inverted commas, like
It's
better they
public.
are, like
Yeah.
they've got more followers, they get more likes, they get more interaction. It's such an easy space to become very vulnerable and start comparing yourself and start getting insecure.
Mm,
But you're right. Like, whilst I understand that it's very, and these social media apps are literally playing with with
mm,
our brains. Like, it
mm,
makes sense that we feel that insecurity and it makes sense that we want to compare, but there's a narrative that's being built that we have to have these big social followings in order to make connection, in order to be successful entrepreneurs and
mm,
creatives. And it is essentially a lie. And I think we're gatekeeping ourselves from success. I
mm,
asked my audience the other day, who has a small social media following and who is a creative full time, who is having successes as a small
mm,
following, and the amount of people, like 2,000 followers or below, who are full time artists making connection all the time, like
mm,
just not letting this narrative and this comparison get in their way from doing what it is they want to do. And I think that too many of us sit and make ourselves feel so small
mm,
because we don't have the big following, when really that's a story that's just getting in our way, and that
mm,
comparison is just keeping us so small. And it's not even
mm,
true, because you
mm,
can take up space and you can posture yourself and you can create incredible things and make impact with
mm.
much smaller social followings.
Hmm. There'll always be someone with more following too.
Exactly.
And yeah, it really infuriates me because I'm like, it's so dumb. And, it's something that I've definitely shifted my opinion around and been like, I'm not being like, I'm not playing into this game. Like,
Mm,
social media is a business and I refuse to be your puppet.
yeah. And I think so many of us feel like we're just being used and abused by a
Mm,
system that doesn't really respect us.
mhm,
And we don't have to feel powerless because of that. Like, we can
mhm,
take our power back. But I want to be honest and say that I get trapped in the game all the time. And as you
mhm,
said, there's always going to be someone who has more followers than you. And I'll often look at, like, accounts who are doing similar things to me, creatives who are doing similar things to me. And, they've had like just ridiculous growth. And I'll sit
mhm,
there and I'll be like, what am I not doing?
mhm,
Why them? What's
mhm,
wrong?
mhm,
Why are they getting this wild amount of growth? And I'm, I have a beautiful community that consistently grows, in very,
mhm,
small but beautiful ways. But I'll sit there and be like, why aren't I viral? Why aren't? And I'm like,
mhm,
fuck that. And then I'll feel played by them, and
mhm,
I've been made to feel small. And now I'm comparing myself. It,
mhm,
it doesn't make me feel good. I know what it is that I'm doing. I know I offer value. And the question is unknowable anyway. I don't know why some people go viral and
mhm,
other people don't. And it's just another way of keeping myself small and making
mhm,
myself feel like shit. And it's also something that will never go away, because there'll
mhm,
always be someone with a bigger social
mhm.
media following than me.
Yeah, I love that, and thank you for sharing that. And I think I I want to avoid giving too many tips because I just want to like be raw and not have to fix
Yeah.
problems. But I think the thing that like around that is like sometimes, and just for those out there who might be like, yeah, but like let's not lie, social media following can help you, right? It does.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, whatever. It definitely, and I'm not in denial of that, and I'm not taking that for granted, and I'm constantly questioning how I can show up for the people who have said, I'm choosing to follow you because I want you to help me, and I have to be like, rather than being like, fuck social media, being like,
Yeah.
shifting my mindset to be like, this isn't about Instagram. This is about the people who have said, hey,
Yes.
I think you can help me, and
Yeah.
putting those people at the front and center and actually doing that. And there are times where I have just been like, you know what, I'm just going to show up for if one person says I got something out of this, then it's worth it. And
So
also,
important.
yeah, and it's just like, also don't underestimate the power of consistency, right? It's like sometimes the viralness is a fluke or a win. Sometimes there's like, you know, I've been kicked out of the other algorithm and my gram's not getting reached
Exactly.
and things. But then I sit down and I do a meditation. I'm like, how can I really help? And it's like, it didn't even matter what time of day it was, or, you know, whether it was the best image or, you know, it was SEO'd or promoted. What did well because it was truth. And it was just, you know, like
Yeah.
it was a authentic piece of my heart.
I
Yeah.
have this love note that I post all the time that says, stop trying to make viral art and make vulnerable art. And that's
Mm,
what I always come back to when I get in these traps of comparison. And I do fall into these traps of comparison with some regularity because I'm
mm,
so online and it is a
yeah.
huge amount of my work.
Mm-hmm,
And so I do want to be really honest about that. I'm very aware of it, and I try and nurture and love myself through it, but it
mm-hmm,
does happen with some frequency.
yeah.
Um, but I keep coming back to, Amie, your job here is to create vulnerably and share
Mm,
generously. It is not to create viral art.
mm-hmm,
It's not to create viral creations.
mm-hmm,
Vulnerability and generosity is my two things
mm-hmm,
that I always come back to
mm-hmm.
when I'm in that pattern of comparison.
And that's it, right? It's like at the end of the day, the moment you're in that comparison of how can I get ahead,
Mm,
and especially when you're in a place of service and you're coaching and you're teaching, your focus should be on our audiences, right? And it
yeah.
should be on the people that we're serving, not on how they can feed our egos, you know?
Yes, that's such a
Yeah.
beautiful way of putting it. Like, we're looking at it all wrong when we get into
Mm,
perspective. It's like, how can we're almost like dehumanizing the people that
mm-hmm.
are online. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Like, we
It's just,
forget that it's literally just a bunch of humans
mm-hmm,
interacting on
mm-hmm,
in a digital space.
mm-hmm,
And we start thinking, how can all of these we farm these people to like
mm,
make me and my ego feel good, rather than
yeah.
saying, how can I serve, and how can
Mm-hmm,
I be vulnerable, and how can I, you know, yeah, how can I serve
mm,
the people that have chosen to be with me in this space?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, really sitting in that. And that's not to say that's an easy thing to do, because again,
No.
these apps can really fuck with us. The number games can feel very alluring and very tempting.
Mm-hmm,
So it's harder to do
mm-hmm.
than it is to just say,
Yeah.
but it's important. It's really important,
Yeah.
because we're
And
going
I
to feel
think,
so out of
yeah.
control if we don't.
Mm. Yeah, and that they keep moving the bar. And I mean, like
Yeah.
social media, we did a podcast, really great one recently with Word Fetty Anita, and so I will refer people back to that for some tips around it, because she gives some really good ways to approach social media. But I want to
Nice.
dive into comparison, because I think the reason why this needs to be talked about, and why we all need to be good at catching it,
Mm.
is the moment you're in comparison, yeah, you're in your ego, you're in your you don't create as well. You create from lack and desperate
Mm.
and competition, and yeah, how do I get more for me? And it can really stifle you mentally and creatively, and distract you. It's a time waster when we're in comparison, because we're not feeling when you can't channel great ideas that are going to go viral or are going to help people,
Mm.
when you're tunnel visioned in, why aren't I good enough, or why are these people better
Yeah.
than me? So
Yeah.
it is the thing that you need to catch. If you're feeling like work's not flowing, you're not taking action, you're doubting yourself, you're, yeah,
Mm.
overwhelmed, you're avoiding work is a big one.
Yeah, super interesting.
Mm,
We're not in our power when we're in those patterns of
mm,
comparison. You're right.
mm,
Like, I couldn't have said it better. We can't channel creativity when we're outside of ourselves, looking
mm,
at other people, rather than sitting with ourselves and asking, but what do I have to give?
mm,
And sitting with the knowledge that we are incredibly unique. like ridiculously unique. And that's where we need to sit, because we have perspectives and ways of viewing the world that literally nobody else does. But you're too busy focusing on all these other people who you can't mimic, you can't come close to, because you're completely different to them. And for me, that's such a big reality. Like I can, and I do get trapped in, wow, they're doing so well, and like I would love to be getting the opportunities that those people are getting, but then I forget who I am, and I forget the power that I hold, and I forget the uniqueness of the art that I bring to the world. And without that, I don't have my power.
And I think I remember that moment where I was like, there is no competition when you're living your purpose, because no one can do what you're put on this planet to do that's uniquely yours. And the more you can stay in your own lane and tune in, like I learned to tune into my heart and my intuition, and have a strict morning routine that guided my work practice and my service, and and all of those things. So that for me was when I definitely stepped out of less of that comparison, and was like, I don't even care, like, and even you're more generous. I've coached so many people to be coaches, to start magazines, to start podcasts, to do everything that I do. I'm like, whatever, you can take everything
what
that
you
I've
want
done. Like, because you'll put your stamp on it that I couldn't possibly do. And I think but yeah, so it is that that shift. But let's actually just get to the shit part, like, because I don't actually kind of want to be inspiring, to be honest. But like yes, I mean, I think I don't want to be like, look, I've got it all together, because I definitely still compare. But let's jump into that. And I just actually had a memory, because I want to know how you feel when you're comparing yourself, and how you're doing it. And if you don't mind me asking, because I know that you signed up for like being vulnerable and and everything.
I did make a promise. Yeah. Go for it.
I'm gonna hit you up here. I remember recently seeing something about somebody had posted something around that was something you had written, and it had been shared in a way that was somebody else had redesigned it or something, and then had success. And there was and I'd watched it, and then I was like, oh, I wonder how Amy's going to approach this. And I was ready to see your reaction, which I loved, by the way. But I would love to go back. Even before you reacted with such grace, what did that feel like to find that, or to come across it, or
So it's so funny. I've had a few experiences in the last few months of people taking my work and making it look like their own. And I was seeing people in my community share this post, and it was like redesigned, like, and it was just like they had attributed it to themselves. And I was reading it, and I was like, fuck me, that sounds very like my own writing. And then I was like looking at it, I was like, this really, really sounds like me. And then I went back and looked, and it was literally word for word my words.
Yeah.
And it was shared by, millions, like it had millions of people see it. It was really successful. And my first reaction was a deep frustration and irritation. And I felt, it's quite violating to have someone take like that. And this idea that I'd lost an opportunity to connect with other people is also frustrating as well, right? Because if, and it on it's not shallow, but it's on a basic level, my work could have been attributed to me, and I could have been witnessed by many more people. So that was my first reaction, was frustration and anger, and just a real irritation. But I was basically powerless. Like, this account refused to acknowledge that they had taken my words. I had very little ways of, actually taking control. And so what was I going to do? Was I just going to sit here with this? I mean, feeling irritated and feeling frustrated is one of the worst emotions for me personally, because it's just
can
so
I ask
icky.
What that looks like for you?
Yeah.
Like, are you like storming around the house? Are you crying? Are you chatting it out with your partner? Like, what are you doing?
Initially, frustration and irritation, it's one of my, as I said, it's an emotion that I really dislike. I really don't like how it manifests for me. I don't want to be touched. I don't want anyone to make any too loud noises. I just want everyone to fuck off, like very like short, snappy, like if the smallest thing goes wrong, you know, I bump into the door and then I'm like, oh, great. You know, like another thing, like things
for
compile
fuck's
very
sake.
easily. And I don't want to be stuck in that space for too long because energetically it's exhausting. My central nervous system doesn't do very well in there. Like I've got a lot of chronic health problems. Like I know it's going to compile. So when stuff like that happens, I have to get under control with relative speed because otherwise I'm just going to pay for it. And then, you know, someone's stolen my work and I feel like shit. And so for me, again, I've had to come back to this again and again and again. I'm like, you know, this is a sign that your work resonates. Like, it's a shame that this has happened, but come back home. Like, you are so unique. You are clearly making an impact. Like, your words are out there in the world and people will need them. And I came home to the fact that, you know, this post did really well. Like, it obviously connected to a lot of people. And I was like, at its heart, like, my words did what they were meant to do. And even if they weren't attributed to me, like, they're out there, you know, making the impact that I intended for them to make. But yeah, really difficult thing to navigate because it can feel very violating. And I know a lot of artists and creatives move through this issue with plagiarism a lot, and it can be very, very difficult.
Did you end up reaching out or anything like that? Or
I
know you
did,
just
to no real avail. My beautiful followers, you know, were asking, but nothing.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened. It sucks. It is a tough one, hey, because I think it's, yeah, in a lot of ways, especially when you show up with so much generosity, that you're like, really, like, and then, you know, that there's something that it's a, you know, a battle that you can't win, and that, you know, will take away from your ability to keep showing up. But I think what I love about that is like, yeah, like allowing the feeling to be there. And, you know, I think it's having that self-talk too. It's like, it kind of sounds a bit dumb, but it's like, you know, that the words of affirmation that, like, if you nothing else, I have them written in a book. So at the top of every page that I ever write for my to-do list is like, today will flow with ease and abundance, or clarity, or focus, or, you know, productivity, whatever the words are that I want. But I'm never, you know, it started a long time ago, but I'm always surrounding myself with words, because even if you're not consciously reading them, they are soaking in, like they're in your peripheral. And when this shit hits the fan, you need to grab hold of something, you know, like, you're like, quick,
my gosh,
give me the words, even if I don't believe them, repeat, repeat, repeat.
For me, the power of my internal world and the language that I use in my head has been the biggest game changer in my life. And so knowing that I have the language to self-soothe and the language to bring myself down from emotional highs and the language to help me when I feel entrapped, like in a comparison cycle, has been the most important thing. And I learn how to speak to myself in my journal in the morning. So, you know, if I've woken up and I just don't feel enough and I'm like, fuck, this person's stealing my work, it's doing better than when I shared it, these people are getting opportunities. If I feel unseen, which can be so painful, I'll go to my journal and I'll see myself, I guess, and make sure that I know my own worth and find language that is extremely grounding and brings me home back to my power. So I'm not out there looking at others. And then I learned that language because I journal every day. And so then I've learned this new language, and it becomes a part of my internal monologue, not just a part of my pages. And yeah, you're right. Like the power of words is so important. And so, sorry.
And I think that's part of it, right? I was just thinking then, I was like, when was the last time I felt like that real triggered sense of comparison? And when you mentioned the power of words, I think I can be quite sensitive in a sense. And there's been a few different examples over the years, but more recently I just thought of then, which is funny because I didn't plan to bring this up, but this is why we're doing it. But I wasn't even aware of it, is that there's also when words go in negatively for me, and if I get a piece of negative feedback, that can really stick for me. And I just remembered, while we're on the topic of comparison and vulnerability, is when I recorded my book, when I launched my book, obviously I really pushed to get an Audible deal. I was like, that would be cool, you know? And so I did a bunch of back end hustle. I spoke to my publisher. I really, you know, kind of try to get it ahead of the game, get it right. The day that I found out that Audible had purchased my book, I was like, like I fell on the ground crying. Like I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be an
Such a
Audible
big
and
deal.
I'm gonna narrate it. Like it was huge. I got straight in a car and I Ubered to my friend's house and we popped champagne and I was like, Audible
Amazing.
for my book. And then I launched it. I was in lockdown. I was exhausted afterwards. And I went into Audible and they were like, look, we're still open. We're in lockdown, but like, you can come in. We've got these protocols. Like,
Mm.
we've listened to your podcast. We think you've got a great voice, blah, blah, blah. Public speaking has never been an issue for me. Like, love it.
Mm. Yeah, you're born
Speaking.
for it.
But there was one person who was quite close to me in my life who once said to me, like, oh, I think I was reading out loud a book or something, and
Mm.
or reading something. It was a personal relationship, and got some feedback that the person couldn't follow what I was saying or something like that. It was
Yeah.
just like this little
Offhand
potent
comment, but
thing of being like, oh, let me read it.
fuck.
And at the time, it was just like, ha ha ha, right?
Yeah.
The funny thing is that one line has stuck in the back of my head when I went to record for Audible, and it was there and there and there. And then I felt like I wasn't in flow at all when I recorded my book.
Mm.
And I had also neglected my book to this point. I was just
Yeah.
like, I still to this day have not read it. And, every now and again I'll flick it open and have a look, or, people will talk to me about it.
Yeah.
Went to record. Audible came back to me the day after and we're like, yeah, that didn't quite go to plan. Like, you're not really that good. Did a voice coaching session, was like, yep, I'm gonna master this skill. Don't tell me I can't do something.
Yeah.
Then kept avoiding replying to Audible to rebook it in. Had all this homework to do, wasn't doing it. Eventually, like, it was quite a hard thing to do, but I was like, no, Audible were like, well, look, here's some other narrators who can do it. And I was like, so exhausted by this point that I just had to throw my hands in the air and be like,
Wow.
don't try and be the hero.
Yeah.
But then
Wow.
where the comparison comes in is, I think a lot of authors, including you, who are close to me, and what I would consider, like podcasters and similar to me, and watching everybody record their books with an Audible and being like, how come I couldn't do that? Like, I'm a public speaker, and I really, like, there was so many what you were one of them, but there was other people where I watched the beautiful process of you guys, sharing that content. And I had posted content of being like, I'm at Audible, and then I was like, got the email, I was like, delete, because I was like, fucking like, and yeah, and that was a huge one for me, of being like, I should have tried harder. I wasn't good enough. I gave up too soon. Look at all these other people who are doing it, and I've missed the chance to put my voice to my first book. Yeah, and it's still like, like, you have those vulnerable days where you have to be like, and it's like, there is a moment, I don't know if you ever feel like this, where you kind of want to, like, you're like, oh yeah, but or like your mind starts going, or or you can have a distaste for, like, and be like, I don't know, it is that thing where it's like, it's so uncomfortable that you're kind of looking for someone or something to blame, or
Oh my God,
and
I'm so glad you brought that kind of thing up, because I think blaming and victimhood is something that can really easily come out of comparison. Super interesting. Like, this idea that, like, when I feel like my book launch didn't go as well as it wanted it to, but instead of, and comparing to other people, like, their book launch went so much better than mine, and instead of being like, okay, well, like, let's look at what we can do for the next book launch, let's look at what's in my control, victim mindset. It's because I wasn't supported in XYZ. It's because this was happening in the world at that time. It's because Amazon fucked me over in this way. And I think comparison can so quickly move straight to the blame, straight to the victim, and victim mentality, and that lack of self-responsibility is, again, a really terrible place to create, and you can't thrive in that spot. You just can't, because you're the victim, and the victim never wins.
And I think that's such a good point, because The other thing about comparison is like you actually don't know what's going on for other people. Like what can be
No,
perceived as a successful book launch, like
exactly.
you don't know. Like, is that person happy doing that amount of events? Is that
Mm,
person feeling fulfilled? Is it, like, yeah. And it's just like, you don't know, like
you
what you,
don't know.
and that's so, I've been having this obsessive conversation lately about we're not actually anywhere. We are, or anything. We're only defined by what we're not.
Ooh,
So
yeah,
you've
interesting.
created a perception for whatever reason that that person had a successful book launch, right? But
Mm.
it's not, you're defining that as success, but what you're saying as yours is not successful is by the
Mm.
distance or the lack of what you didn't have. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, completely. So it's all about what I lacked, not about what they had. And it's the distance in
Yeah.
between that. Yeah.
Which actually, and so just because that person has those things, why are you calling that success and yours not success?
Mm.
When in actual fact, your book launch did this, that person's book launch did that, and
Yeah.
it's almost parallel. There were
Yes.
different experiences
They were
rather
completely
than
different.
one wins, one doesn't win. And it's like
Mm.
someone was telling me about this the other day. I think it's like one for one or something I need to look that up. But
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
instead of being like that person's, yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting that that's circled back
We are
around.
so we're so prone to putting ourselves like on a ladder, like, or like ranking people
Yeah.
instead of just recognizing that each experience is completely unique and completely its own,
Mhm.
and there really is no sure way of
Mhm.
comparing. Like we're just not
Yeah.
very good at it.
Well, I just think, yeah, it's like the world that we live in, which is like one wins and one loses,
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than like, what if they're just both valid experiences unique to that person
Yeah.
and exactly what that person needed in that time.
I think for creatives and
Uh-huh.
entrepreneurs, we often have this real scarcity mindset where it's like there's
Yeah.
not enough for everybody. And it can definitely
Yeah.
come from that, like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't do as well because they did better and they took it from me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like not the case at all.
No.
And it's so, toxic. And again, it
Mm-hmm.
leads back to a victim mindset where it's very woe is me.
Mm-hmm.
And they took something from me, they did
Mm-hmm.
better, so I did worse. And you're
Yeah.
just so powerless in that position.
And I think the opposite to victim mindset is like, instead of being like that person won and I lost,
Yeah.
it's that person has shown me what else I could do for my next book launch. So it's a
It's a
lesson.
learning curve.
It's
Like,
a feedback loop.
oh my God, if we could approach all of the moments where we feel like, where we don't feel enough, where we feel like we lacked, if we could approach it with curiosity rather than comparison, and we kept leaning into curiosity rather than comparison, like we'd be leveling up all the fucking
Mm-hmm.
time, and
Yeah.
we'd be playful and adventurous, and we'd be learning so much,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just I think it's such a great way, and it's a great language tool. I think if I feel comparison, I lean into it with curiosity, like,
Mm-hmm.
why am I attracted to them? Jealousy can be a roadmap. So often, we can really see where it is that we want to go when we feel
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of comparison or jealousy.
Right.
So, and getting curious about it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
letting it guide you,
Mm-hmm.
letting it be a time for you to start thinking about what it is you want to do next.
Yeah. And I love that so much because there's also, it's like, that actually requires deep work, the curiosity, because the initial often, and if anyone's done therapy, that like you come walking into a therapy session, like this person did this and then they said that, and
Yeah.
and then the therapist, if I've always done like process therapy or psychotherapy where they just go,
Mm.
cool, that's the top layer, but I want to know what's underneath,
Yes.
and so it's like the trigger is the feeling and the initial reaction, and then calming your body down and being like, do I actually want that? Is that right
Yes.
for me? Does that suit me? Which means that we're not reacting and trying to fit into other people's life's goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's such a beautiful point as well. Fuck, this conversation just could go on and on.
Mm,
It brings up so much stuff. Like, I often find myself being, jealous, or I want to compare myself to someone, and I am, I'm thinking, oh, where are they getting those opportunities from? Why are they being
mm,
able to, move around the world in that way and I'm not? And what I actually need to ask is, do you even want that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that something you even want? Or is your
Right.
ego just like so triggered at watching someone else's success that you're just, making comparisons, willy-nilly, and
Mm-hmm.
jealousy with no reason, without getting that curiosity going
Mm-hmm.
inwards and being like, is that even something you want? There's an
Mm-hmm.
incredible creative that I love, who for some reason she just triggers me. Like whenever I see the incredible stuff she's doing, I'm like, oh, why can't I do that? But when I really look at it, I'm just in awe of what she's doing, but I actually don't want to do a lot of what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some wound in me that I need to look into deeper,
Mm-hmm.
and it is me. It's nothing to do with her. And I
Mm-hmm.
need to ask, what's she triggering you? What's she bringing up? And
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I have a big thing about feeling seen. And I often feel, for a lot of my creative journey, I felt really unseen. A lot of rejection from publishers, a lot of silence from publishers. I just felt like I was creating in a vacuum, and no one was able to see what I had to give for a really long time, like years and years. And I think for a lot of creatives, that's a really painful thing to experience, that feeling of being invisible and unseen. And I think for some reason, like, this incredible creative is just getting so much, she's getting a lot, she's being really seen, like people just fucking love her. And I think it triggers that wound in me and that fear in me of me being left unseen. And so it's not actually about me wanting to do what she wants to do. It's about an internal wound and a fear of being
Mm-hmm.
left unseen.
Yeah, that's so real. Thank you for sharing. And it's like there's a couple of things I thought of when you were speaking then is like one, is it the things that they have, or is it the feeling or the energy that they emit that you probably
Yes,
want, that you're being called
that's
to rise
such a
into,
great observation.
rising into, actually you're actually wanting probably to hold more of the energy that she's
Yes.
holding. Secondly, how funny, well, not funny, but like this is the whole purpose thing, right? Your rejection has means that you can, why you speak so potently
Mm,
about to the creatives who are starting out, or wanting
mm,
to give up and things, because you've experienced it. And
yes.
so that's why it cuts through. It's why people go, I love what Amie does. I
Mm,
resonate. You do have incredible following who's loyal, and also some
mm,
really big people who follow you and
mm.
validate your work as well. And you wouldn't be speaking, you wouldn't be able to, those words wouldn't be
Yes.
coming out of you had you not had your experiences of
Oh my
those,
God,
right?
yeah.
Because people are like, she's
I
calling
often think
bullshit,
of that.
like what would she know?
Yeah,
You could.
exactly.
Mm,
I used to get really jealous of, authors like, for example, Stephanie Meyer, who wrote the Twilight series. It's like
mm,
the first time she sent in her manuscript, she got picked up immediately.
mm,
And I'm always like for me, when I was being rejected, literally, I think, maybe like 400, 500 times for my novels, like so
wow.
many times. I'm like, what the fuck? She got picked up straight away. And when I hear her tell her story, there's this, very wounded part of me that's like, fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. And I owe so much to the woman who went through the 400, 500 rejection letters, because
Mm-hmm.
she's the place I teach from so often.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave me so much experience.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so well observed. Also that energy
Mm,
thing, again, you're so
yeah.
right. Are you jealous of what they experience, or are you jealous of like their emotional state and the way they present themselves and the energy that they give
Mm,
out? Like I have never thought
yeah.
about that before, but it's definitely
Mm-hmm.
something
Because
that's
then
very real.
that becomes the, like, not the goal, but it's like you actually, it's, I've talked about it before, it's almost like an embodiment of what you can, it's like, I mean, every ancient culture and religions and traditions and yoga techniques all use idols and icons and
Yeah.
deities who emit an energy that we then go, okay, if I'm feeling in this state and that person's
Yeah.
emitting an energy, I'm gonna channel, I'm gonna channel Beyonce, I'm gonna channel
Yes.
Oprah, or like, it's so normal for us to channel somebody else who's already, to fake it till we make it, or walk on stage and have a persona that we put on, because it'll help
Yes.
us to step up or to rise into that. And I think that's, it's people who hold that energy can actually be, that icon for an
Mm,
energy that you're like, cool, I can
you
study
can
that.
be
and
like
and
that.
yeah, and look at that. It's almost like a navigation point, or what's the,
Beautiful
like a
compass, like
compass for,
yeah.
like, that's what I want to be more of. They've
Yeah.
shown you, they've unlocked something that needs to be unlocked in you.
100%. And that's
Mm.
pure, like, I feel like all that you just said is curiosity, right?
Mm.
It's just like leaning into the curiosity that comparison can
Mm.
bring.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Let's go to the beginning of both of our journeys, or, you know,
Yeah.
those out there, because I think there's two parts that I think are important to talk about is before people start a business
Mm.
or creating art in your audience's space, who can go, they, a comparison kills their ideas or their action before they even start, because they're like, oh, this person's already doing it, or they're doing it better, or, you know, it's like the difference between, I said this to a client recently, they were sending me some competitors that they kept coming across in their industry, and
Mm.
here for the competitive analysis, it's
Mm.
necessary and it's good and it's insightful, but you always have to be checking in as to whether it's serving you or whether
Yes.
it's making you doubt. And then so there's people who don't even start because they've already made this big long list of other people who are doing it better. And then secondly, there's people who start and the traction is slow when you start out, you know, and especially
Mm.
now, you know, it's noisier and noisier every single day.
Yeah.
And because they're not getting the overnight wins. And I remember the feeling of being like, why am I not here yet?
Yeah.
And, you know, looking back now, I'm like, you're there,
You're on
but
the way.
it wasn't gonna, if there was no way you could have done that in your first year. And if you did,
Mm.
you wouldn't be being able to speak from this place, because you didn't
Yes.
have the fight, you didn't have the 7 years experience, you know.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I couldn't have
Yeah.
written a
Yeah.
book in my first year of business because there's no way. Yeah, I needed 7 years of business coaching and teaching
Oh my
and
God.
things
Yes.
to be able to write that book. But people
Mm.
who, you know, with the first couple of years in business where they're just like, oh, it's just not working, they give up, or they change their idea, or, you know, they a big one that I see is they're like, yeah, it's just, you know, it's a side hustle, or they start out guns blazing, and then they're kind of like, yeah, it's this thing that I'm kind of doing, but like, you know, I'm actually, you know, I need to go back to job or whatever. Like
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
it's so
Secretly just
necessary.
sliding out. Yeah.
Just keeping it on the side. And it's like,
Yeah.
if I'm not working really hard on it, then it's not my fault if it's not working. Right.
Oh
Because
my
it's like,
God. Such a
yeah,
great
like,
protection method,
yeah,
like,
it's
yeah.
so subtle.
Yeah.
Um, do you remember those times, and
Oh
what
my
are some
God.
tips,
Yes.
or like, how did it feel? How did you overcome either of those stages?
Yeah. This idea that it's too noisy for me. There are so many people out there who are already doing this work. There are already people who, are making so much money doing what I want to do. They're taking up all the space. Like, these narratives can be so convincing in keeping us small and silent and mediocre and away from the vulnerable thing of
Mm-hmm.
doing what we've been called to do. And I think, whilst it is, I understand why we think about it like this, and I thought about it like this too. It's also a really good excuse. Like, it's a very easy one to grab out as to why not to do it. There's too much noise, oh, there's already people doing it. Like, it's a really great excuse to bow out. But I think when we look into it further, it's just not as valid as we think it is. And for me, I just want to get into this. There's too much noise. So kind of comparing yourself to like the whole market, like there's too many people out there doing the same thing. So it's not necessarily comparing yourself to one person, but just like looking at how individual and, in inverted commas, small you are compared to like the massive people who are already doing something similar to what you are doing. Like, it's just not, we are still at the very beginning of an incredible time for entrepreneurs and social medias. Entrepreneurs and creatives, social media, the connection economy, like all these different and new platforms. Like, we're right at the beginning of an extremely exciting time. And think about people like 200, 300 years from now, like, and there'll be still people making it work, producing art, making impact. But we're right at this initial little big bang of what this is, this connection economy for entrepreneurs and for artists. And the fact that we're already bowing out, we're already saying it's too noisy, is ridiculous. Like, there is still so much space to take up. And because, again, we'll come back to that, you are so unique and you have something very unique to give. Like, there is no one doing what you will do. There's actually no competition, like what you were saying before, because nobody can take up space in the way that you can take up space. And this excuse needs to be investigated and excavated, because I think it comes up wanting.
Yeah, I love that. And there's so many people on the planet, and we're moving towards people wanting, yeah, they're looking for their unique, you know, person who relates to them, not just as like,
Yeah.
you've got something to offer me, but we share the same values, we share the same friends, we share the same accounts that we follow, or you know, like humor, or you know, things like that. And yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And it's, yeah, the idea of this way of life is like, yeah, it's been thousands of years, you know, hundreds of years
Mm.
of business as usual, and
Yes.
we're just breaking free into this. And yeah, I love that idea of being like, this is just the beginning,
It's
and
just the
it's going
beginning.
to keep evolving. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's really nice. I actually, back to this idea of like abundance, another
Mm.
wacky mind thing that I have been contemplating. I mentioned to you that I was caught in the floods in Brisbane last
Yeah.
week before. And my brother, I'm going to quote my brother-in-law here, because so I was with all my family. We were all stuck. We were originally all meant to be together. I was in a house with my mum and my dad, my brother, his wife, and their two kids. Um, yes, send prayers, send prayers to my past self. No, my brother-in-law and my sister got trapped in floodwaters. They got turned around. My little sister was evacuated. So instead, couldn't all be together. So the family group chat is popping off, right? With designing a TikTok video, like all these things, just like checking in on each other, all these things. And then I just have this reaction, because I'm like, the rain was torrential, and I was like, when the hell is this going to stop? And then I had this thought process, which, you know, maybe other people have actually, you know, learned in probably grade 9 science. But I was like, is there, did you, I mean, I'm quoting my brother-in-law. My question was, is the amount of water on this planet right now all the water that we get?
I can't believe you said that, because I literally asked the same question and I Googled the
Mhm.
same question every like a week ago.
Right.
All right, keep
And
going. Tell me.
so let's see if our answers match up. My brother-in-law said, yes, whatever we have is all that we'll have. The thing that I was reflecting on is this rain is coming torrential right now from the skies. It'll
Mm.
then absorb into the land. It will, some of it will turn to, you know, ice, or
Yeah.
be sucked up into plants. You will
Yeah.
drink some of it, you
Yeah.
know, it'll flow down rivers. Like,
Yeah.
there's only the certain amount of water. It just changes transformation all the time.
Mm. I love it. The
Is that
question that
what, yeah.
came to
What was
me,
yours?
mine was kind of a variation on this question. It wasn't exactly. I said, is the water that we have today the water that we've had throughout all of history? And it
Mm-hmm.
is. Like,
Yeah.
we've just had the same water and the same amount of
Yeah.
water forever.
Yeah. And it, so, and
Isn't
it
that
just
wild?
moves and changes, and it's this constant evolving, changing process. So it's in
So
human
cool.
bodies, it's in animals right now, it's in plants. So
Mm.
it just changes all the time.
It's really
Um,
magical.
it's pretty cool. And it led me, I don't know, I was just like, life is always in movement and
Yeah.
change and taking different transformations. So even though it might be not be working or in a certain way right now, you know, it
Let
has
it.
the ability to transform, because water is constantly moving and
Yeah, I
flowing.
love that.
But it also led me to contemplating how the universe, you know, there's an abundance in the universe, and it's
Mm.
like, there, just because I I create and I put
Mm.
something out there, that doesn't reduce the amount of energy in
Mm.
the universe.
Mm.
So a
Yeah.
creation and a birth, right, takes an
Yeah.
exertion of energy that takes an idea, makes it a reality, right? It's
Yeah.
an idea and a creation, but that doesn't deplete the energy in the universe and like the
Yeah.
cosmos.
Yeah. It
The
doesn't
like,
take anything away.
yeah,
It just
it's
looks
it's
different.
it's just constantly in movement.
Yeah, I
I've
love that.
created and I've used this energy form, but then through that creation, I give some of that energy form to you,
Yeah, that's
because we're
amazing.
bouncing,
Yeah.
and so it's just constantly moving and creating. This
It's
is
really
inside of
cool.
my brain in whilst I'm locked in a house in Toronto with my family, just thinking about how, yeah, we don't deplete it. It's just changing
It's just
formation,
moving. Yeah. It's
right?
beautiful.
And so there's, when you look at it through that, there's no lack. because every
Yeah.
creation gives life form
Yeah.
and transports energy through you to
Yeah.
somebody else who
I love that.
experiences that creation.
And when we consume creations and when we move through life, we're replacing that energy and creative energy
Yeah.
back within us. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. It's
There's
just
so
moving
much
all the
to
time.
learn from it, from the
Yeah.
universe, really.
Right.
Yeah, you go.
Sorry, just a sideball there, but yeah, I think
I
it's
love
that,
it.
yeah, that feeling of, I think that for me is like you creating is not taking away from somebody else creating, and
Mm,
there's enough to go around,
there's
and
enough to go around.
the
Yeah.
universe is actually constantly expanding. It's like
Mm,
there is no edge to the universe and the stars and the gases and the lights and the movements.
yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you, Kay.
Thanks. No worries. Just really went
Little
Cosmo
insight into
there.
your mind.
Yeah. And then so
I
I think there's another. Was there any more to touch on that early stages? It's like,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
feel
for
like
me, I'm like,
I
just start.
yeah. Well, what
There's
about
enough.
for you? Like
Yeah.
when you started, were you comparing yourself a lot? It's a very vulnerable stage when you start, and I feel like
Yeah.
there's a lot of room for comparison because,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, like you don't see the wins immediately,
Mm-hmm.
and because you're so vulnerable, there is a lot of
Yeah.
space for comparison to seep in.
Mm. Yeah, no, big time. I felt like an imposter because people were, again, it's the voices outside of me that I had to learn to shut off, because if somebody
Mm,
questioned me and said, well, where did you do your MBA if you're starting a business? Even
yeah.
now, people be like, so what's your side hustle? I'm like, startup creative. It's a business. They're like, well, what business did you start to be able to give business advice? I'm like, I started a business to give business advice. So that I still get that question.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I think for me, it was shutting out the voices. So when there
Yeah.
was some of those voices, some of them are necessary for me to be like, yeah, cool. Thank you for making me contemplate
Yeah.
deeper, and growing and seeing where I can expand or up level,
Mm,
upskill. And then some of them were just not conducive to my self confidence. And
I
so I
love
had to
that.
shut them out,
Yeah.
and remove people who, but I think that I'm all for people challenging me. I'm always here to be told,
Yeah.
what about this? But then there's
Yeah.
people who they're not there for your higher good to grow and expand and challenge you. They're there to tear
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
down,
Yeah. Yeah.
or they're just not, they don't care about the longevity of you and your business. They're just like,
Yeah.
blurting shit out that for me spirals in my head.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I think creating a sense of safety as entrepreneurs and creatives is incredibly important, especially at the beginning when we're so vulnerable to feelings of comparison, feelings of imposter syndrome. And I was having a conversation with my membership of creatives yesterday about how we can cultivate senses of safety so that as we do really vulnerable shit, like starting a business, asking for money, putting our services out there, we still have a sense of safety so that we're not triggered into constant comparison and constant imposter syndrome and feeling like a fraud. And I think that came up a lot. Like boundaries obviously came up a lot, but blocking people who were committed to misunderstanding you, committed to comparing you. Like there are people out there, who are very triggered by the bravery that it takes to be a creative and to be an entrepreneur, and they put their shit on you. And so we were talking about blocking them, creating safe spaces away from these people who trigger you, and just cultivating a sense of safety so you're not constantly being put in a vulnerable space where you might compare. That might
yeah.
even look like
Mhm.
blocking people who you compare yourself to a lot.
Mhm.
Maybe you just don't want to see them right
Yeah,
now.
sometimes it's not them, it's
No,
you,
it's you, and you need to take a bit of action.
Mhm. I'm sure I've shared this story before, but when I started my magazine, I was like, I've got an idea. I'm going to tell startup creative. I'm going to tell stories in a magazine and make it really beautiful. And there's no business advice
Mm,
in a beautiful magazine. And so I was like, yes. And there was a lot of me that was like, I think I was 23 when I started. So there was
wow.
blatant, there was a little bit of like confidence that just, that comes when you're younger. And so I started all gun ho, like I can start a magazine, and
Yeah, I
then I
love
was
that.
halfway through, we were so close, realizing how hard it was, towards the
Yeah.
end of issue one. And someone goes, oh, I just found this magazine, Collective Magazine. And
I
it was
hate when
like,
that happens.
and put it on my thing. And I flicked through it and I said, take it away. I can't look at that. I
Oh
just
my
instantly
God.
was like, there's no way. Like, I was just like, I just can't. Like, it just looks better than
No.
mine and all these things. And I just had to be like, it's just not helpful for me right now. I've been
No,
able to
it's
go back
not.
and appreciate it and see it. And, you know, I've met Lisa and spoken at events
Mm,
alongside her and things like that. But it's like, yeah, I could not handle
you
it
weren't in
right
that
then and
space.
there. And I needed to
Yeah.
stay in my own lane because we were
Great.
different to the magazine. It was
Yeah.
complete, it was,
Great.
and I was different, you know, and we were doing things differently. And
Mm,
so I had to actively be like, it's not serving me. Um, and yeah,
love
and
that.
choose to let that out too. And I think yeah, that was a big one. The voices of other people,
Mm,
but also finding the times where I was the one comparing myself when
yeah.
no one else
I
was.
think that's the most beautiful example of, you just kept yourself safe. And I
Mm-hmm,
think for some of us who are really into self-sabotaging, and this was me for a lot of the time, like looking for any excuse almost to like get myself out of these very
mm-hmm,
vulnerable situations where we almost martyr ourselves, we
mm-hmm,
self-sabotage, and we go looking for people to compare
mm-hmm,
ourselves to. So if you weren't in a place where you were willing to put up that boundary, Kay, you could have indulged in that magazine, been like, this is so much better, I'm a piece of shit. And like,
mm-hmm,
I feel like a lot of us, it's very tempting to do that sometimes. It's very tempting to go look at all the creators who are doing better than you,
mm-hmm,
because it provides you, if you can convince yourself, a pretty good excuse to stay small and to not do the
mm-hmm.
vulnerable thing.
Absolutely. And yeah, it doesn't serve. And I think going back to that idea of seeing what people are doing that is inspiring. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, something you said before that I was sharing with a client the other day is, you know, why is this person getting all of these opportunities, or why this person, you know,
Yeah.
these things. I remember feeling that too, and in that victim space. And I flipped it
Yeah.
on the head and I said, and I do this as an exercise with clients now. And I actually flipped it and said, what is it going to take to be, you know, what is perceived as the go-to source for straight up business advice, right? I
Mm,
sat down, what is it going to take for me to be a sought after public speaker or a published
mm,
author, or, you know, and I sat back, and one of the things that I did was when okay, like for example, like this person's getting these opportunities, why is that, you know, and
mm.
started curating my expert status and started curating the steps.
Beautiful.
And instead of sitting around waiting for the opportunities, I started actively seeking them out. So, okay, well, this person, you know,
Yeah.
that person's has spoken here, or they've submitted an article there, or they show up consistently online, or they host a podcast, or, you know, and I actively started moving towards the things that I could actually, you know,
I love that.
curate the
Yeah.
that expertise. And often, you know, that's the best thing, right? You can look at someone that you admire and go to their LinkedIn profile or their
Yeah.
about
And
page
see
on
what
their
they
website
do.
and be like, how did you get there? You know, or you can pay for a
Yeah.
mentoring session and say, tell me,
Yes.
you know, and start actively seeking it out rather than sitting around being a victim to it.
Oh my God, yes. Again, that's
Mm.
just pure curiosity being spurred
Mm.
on from potential comparison.
Yeah.
I think that we can often really like shy away from the feeling. Like if I feel that a sudden like, oh, feeling of like comparison or jealousy, and I'm like, oh, I'm not enough, we can feel like we don't want to experience that feeling, like
Mm-hmm.
because it feels so unpleasant. But if you can immediately have that, well, let's approach it curiously, like
Mm-hmm.
it's actually, it can be a really good thing. Similar
Mm-hmm.
with imposter syndrome, like I always say, imposter syndrome is a sign that you're leveling up. Like
Mm-hmm.
comparison is a sign that you get to be curious and you get to evolve. Like these,
Mm-hmm.
typically negative feelings that we move through as entrepreneurs and creatives don't have to be negative at all, and they
Mm-hmm.
can actually be a really an invitation
Mm-hmm.
to further
Yeah.
what it is you want to be doing.
I love that. I
Mm.
mean, we could talk for hours on this, but I would love to also finish on the topic of something that is also that vulnerable and
Yeah,
personal is,
bring it.
I know that you run your business with your partner,
Ah, yes,
life
yeah.
partner, and I'm interested to hear if comparison comes up inside
Mm.
of your marriage and running a business together.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So not only do we run our business together, but we also both write fiction. So I started writing fiction first, and James, my partner, came into it probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I've probably been writing for maybe 11. And so we're in really similar spaces. And so, in intimate relationships like that, with friendships, but with this is literally my partner in both business and
Mm-hmm.
life. Yeah, it's something we have to manage. And something we have to I think we like to speak openly about it, particularly in terms of like, he's a much faster writer than me. Like, he's nearly written the same amount of books that I have, but he's only been doing it like half the amount of time, and making sure that, you know, I bring that out into the open, so it's not something that I'm festering with. You know, like, I'll be like, James, like, it frustrates me that you're catching up, you've caught up to me, but I've been doing this so much longer, you're so much, you know, you're much quicker. He also is very good at what he does, and he hasn't been doing it as long as me. And again, this is something that I just feel like we need to air out, because it's such an intimate relationship, and because we're with each other all the time, I never want comparison to start festering within me. But it does happen, and it will happen especially if you're around like-minded people who you love and who do similar things to you. Like, and I think that if you're not careful, it can grow into a little bit of toxicity there. So for me, and because language is just so important to me, I have to give it language. I have to open it up. I have to be honest about it. So even if it still is a real feeling, and it still does frustrate me that like I give all I can, but he writes books at like maybe double the pace that I do, like that is what it is. And it doesn't, you know, I don't have to judge it. And I don't have to keep it a secret. Like, I'm allowed to be openly frustrated about it, but I'm also, you know, working at just being okay with me being at my own pace.
Yeah, I love that. And it's that back to that, you know, what is, you know, faster is better, you know,
Yeah,
or like, or
exactly. Ridiculous.
number of books is better,
Yeah,
you know.
like making sure that we're not making arbitrary rules. And then of course, for his perspective, like, I'm just an older writer, so I'm published and he's not yet. And so just making sure that we're, again, like, just open with each other, keeping the communication open when it comes to, you know, if he feels like, oh, why aren't I there yet, you know, that we're not holding on to that. Giving space to these things just allows so much light to enter, and allows so much alleviation of tension, I think, when we just allow ourselves to speak about it out loud.
I love that. I know for me, that I've had a comparison a few times with friends, actually. Not comparison, but I've had a few different comments over the years, and ex-partners.
Yeah.
I'm a morning person. I get up at the crack. If, you know, I'm on, and, you know, I can get most things done before 10 a.m. than people could get done in a day when they're starting their day, right? Or my day could be technically finished at 10 because I've been up since
You've
5.
done it. Yeah.
And I feel, you know, complete with what I've been able to achieve. And there's been a few times that, and people who are just like, wow, you're up so early and you've achieved so much, and I've just started my day. And I, you know, I laugh about it, and we all do. But I was actually, friends said to me the other day and really inquired about it, and said she caught herself and said, oh, you trigger me. You've already done all these things, of course you've done them. And she's like, no, I don't hate that, of course, like, that's you. Have you always been like that? And we had the conversation, and I was like,
good.
you know, sometimes it's not nice. I would like to
I'd like to sleep in.
I would like to sleep in. Or, you know, I've been trained and to do, not trained, but conditioned. Like, my parents are morning people. My dad would, till this day, will walk in and open the windows and be like, get up, you're wasting the day.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, and I've also done sport, mate. Like, you know, I was, you know, I did running for my whole of high school and into university. And I had to be on the track at 6 a.m., you know, so a lot of my conditioning has been early mornings, and that's me, and that's what works for me. And as much as I love talking about morning routines, like, I don't want people to compare to how I do it. You know, I don't have kids. I don't have, you know, when I have been in relationships, I've also tried to be, you know, what the balance between a strict morning routine and, you know, having a coffee in bed and just being present with your lover, you know. So yeah, it's like, you don't know what's going on for that person or how they became that person as well.
And again, like, we culturally, like, for just like me and James, like, we culturally value faster is better, and we culturally value getting things done earlier is better. But like we need to come home to, like, well, is it better for me?
Yeah. Do I actually want to be up at 4:30 in the
Yeah,
morning?
like, maybe you don't. Like, and I think we're so, well, yeah, we need to question those narratives, because we've been fed a lot of narratives that we need to ask, are these mine?
And I think that's it, right? It's like, me being up at 4:30 in the morning isn't why I'm successful. Me being up at 4:30 is allowing myself to flow in my genius times. Like, I've actually
for
just
you.
I've found the way that I work best. I can't do, you know, that if I need to, and occasionally I will, but my brain doesn't work as good. Like, so I know people who can work till 10, 11 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
and I just like, that's not me.
No. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's actually just, yeah, it's about actually finding your flow of what's right, and not repeating it because you're like, oh, that must be why they're successful, or
Exactly.
they.
We're so afraid of looking inward, I think, and saying, well,
Yeah.
how do I best function? Because it's much easier to copy paste
Yeah,
from someone else's.
I'm keen to hear your number one tip because it comes up all the time, and this is why we're here. You know, we've been doing this for years now. Comparison doesn't go away, but I'd love for us to both finish on our number one tip for when comparison does arrive. You're having a bad day, you log on Instagram and you're like spiral, you know, or you see something and it triggers you, or you know, you got a setback, and you know, all of a sudden your brain goes through everything that everyone else is doing. I think especially, you know, we were talking about comparison can really come up when you're feeling exhausted, you know, like coming back to, you know, what's right for you, which is to stop and to rest. But then you open Instagram, you're like, but everyone else is working, or this person's doing this. What is your number one tip? I know we've shared lots throughout this podcast, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would be like, here's a tip for when it comes up?
For me, again, this is about cultivating a safe space. For me, it would be, I need to turn off all my tech. I need to come home to me. So how can I just come and sit with me, my uniqueness, what I have to give, what I have to create? I don't want the noise of what everyone else is doing. Like, I want to just come sit in my internal throne and feel like I can exhale and just be like, there's nothing but who I am and what I am creating. So shutting off external noise for me is really important in those moments. And then just coming home to all my unique abilities, like who it is I am, what it is I'm doing, like what do I want to create, and kind of sitting, just coming home to myself rather than sitting out there in all that noise.
I love that. I love that we're so different. this is why we work well together, because I think
we are really different.
You're really good at like, I'm going to stop and be still.
I'm not good. I try. Tell me, what would you do?
I think mine's the opposite, right? I definitely have those moments, but I think that something that's really served me over the years is the times where I felt comparison. I've flipped it on its head and thought, how can I collaborate with this person?
Oh, that's such a fucking lovely piece of advice.
And that's whether that's showcasing them on the podcast, or putting them in the magazine, or reaching out to say, how can I help? And really, I take action.
I love that.
I either will, if it's a person or a business, it's leaning into collaboration, which is, you know, my whole business of showcasing. So I'm very lucky in that it suits that
works,
way.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I probably would sit down and be like, I'm the creator of my experience. If this person is taking, you know, are you taking action? Because I think sometimes there's parts of me that's like, comparison can come almost as well if you have been copping out a little bit, right? And you're just like, why isn't it working? But then if you ask yourself the question, have I actually
what am I doing?
Have I been giving this the best chance of success? Or have I been kind of cruising a bit and hoping that it would all just come to me or work out? And at the end of the day, creation and business requires focus and energy. And if you're not giving it focus and energy, then it's a baby. It's a creation that needs life force energy. And if you're not giving it life force energy with your focus and your attention and carving out the time and doing what needs to be done, you know, and that's probably me being very hard on myself of being like, well, pull your finger out, get the job done. So collaboration for sure, but then taking accountability for like, am I showing up? And also sometimes it's just a surrender to be like, if I am showing up and there's no action more, then I trust that what's meant for me is coming. And time again, I've seen beautiful examples of, I wasn't showing up on Instagram, but this contact that I made years ago just reached out and asked me to write a program. And that's not going to be all over Instagram, but behind the screens, I'm working on something that I love to do.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a whole other podcast here about self-trust, because I think comparison comes without a lack of trust in what your journey is doing.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I love that, by the way. I'll be taking
Yeah.
that, like when you compare, collab, like move towards that collaboration if you're in that energetic state. But for me as well, what I think when I say like I want to cut myself off from the external noise and come home, it's about coming home to trusting the journey, like trusting that I'm already on the path. And if I have done the checklist, I'm showing up in all the ways that I want to show up, then there's nothing else to be done. I get to exhale. I get to trust. I'm already on the path. So stop pushing and feeling that like irritating, like energy, like, oh, I've got to do more. You're doing it all. Just exhale and allow this journey to take you on, because it's already going there. You're already on the train.
I love that. Hey, can you lead the next conversation? Let's do part 2, and you can do self-trust and
yes, I'd love that.
And we will go on that conversation.
Okay, beautiful. I'm so excited. I'm so
Thank
grateful
you so
for
much.
you, Kay.
So grateful for you. Thank you for having the real talk.
Oh, so good. So
amazing.
Good. Bye.
Lovely to have you as always.